Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Bertha Centre collective. The theme is creative activism, using creativity and innovation to effect social change. I'm Diana Ochola, Bertha Centre's Marketing and Communications Manager, and really excited to have you join us today. Our collectives happen every month, always around a different theme that's around some kind of topical issue, and the format is basically always a presentation followed by a panel discussion. And today we have a really great group of people that I'm really excited to discuss with. And so I really encourage you as well to pick their brains, to ask anything that you have on your mind. Yeah, I'm excited. So I really look forward to this session. Before we kick it off, though, I'd like us to just get a sense of the sentiments in the room. So in the chat, there's a link there and inviting you to finish off the sentence, creative activism is. And using that link, you can drop any words that come to mind or even a sentence. So there's that link there in the chat. Nice. So we're already having creative activism is a responsibility, social entrepreneurship, community-orientated, innovative, imperative, personal, inclusive, diverse, powerful, grounded, energizing, bold, critical, defiant, revolutionary, fun. I love that. Transforming lives, power. Nice. Awesome. Yeah, please continue adding, and let's kick off with our presentation by Ishtar Lakhani. Ishtar has been working as a feminist, an activist, and a troublemaker in the field of social justice advocacy for over 15 years. Currently, she's a freelance radical who collaborates with a range of social justice organizations, movements, and networks globally. And recently, she was named in BBC's Top 100 Women of 2020. I see Ishtar's face, yeah. On that note, Ishtar, handing over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I always get like really awkward at things that people pull up for things, and it's strange. It's strange. So yeah, I'm Ishtar, and we'll be talking to you a little bit about creative activism. I have a presentation, but have no fear. It's mainly pictures. Let me do that. Let me share the screen. And first of all, I just want to start off with, I know sometimes when we say the word creativity or creative, like people get some anxiety going, oh, I'm not creative. I can't draw. I can't sing. I can't paint. I'm not creative. Let's just start off with the fact that everybody here has some form of creative outlet, some way that you express yourself creatively, be it if you draw or paint or sing, etc. But if you garden, if you throw one hell of a dinner party, you are creative. I have a friend that does the most incredible things with spreadsheets. Like, there are different ways to express your creativity, whether it's fashion, whether it's making a great playlist. So I'd like you to, throughout this process, think about like, what is your creative outlet? And then once you've thought about what platform do you use to express yourself creatively, how can you use that in your activism? Because I promise you, you'll see in some of the examples I used today, all of that is useful. You can express yourself creatively through your activism in a number of ways. But to start off with, who am I? I am not an expert. So creative activism is something that I thoroughly enjoy. I have been experimenting with it for a number of years. I collaborate very closely with the Centre for Artistic Activism, where we love to share our joy for creative activism with activists and artists from around the world, but I'm by no means an expert. For me, this is one of the most important questions of creative activism, and a question that I have asked thousands of activists all around the world. And I want you to think about your answer. If you got asked this question, what made you care? You didn't just come out of the womb and decide, I am going to care about refugee rights or the rights of women or to make sure young people have access to education. Like there is something happened in your life. You experienced something at some point where you were like, oh, I want to do something about this. I can tell you from my experience, my moment that made me care actually happened when I was quite young. I remember going to my grandmother's house as a child, and there'd always be tension between my parents and my grandmother, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And when I got a little bit older, I realized what it was. It was the fact that when I would go to my grandmother's house, my grandmother would immediately say, Ishtar, come to the kitchen. And my brother could just chill. And my parents would fight with my grandmother because they were like, if Ishtar's going to learn how to cook, Bashka needs to learn how to cook as well. That's not how we do things in our household. Like if Bashka is chilling, then Ishtar is chilling. That's how we work. And that was my first moment of like, oh, there's something unequal here. There's something not quite right with the world. And I think that's the moment that made me care in particular about women's rights and kind of equality for women. And so I want you to take a minute to think about what was that moment for you. And if you feel free to type it in the chat if you want, even to share with us just in a sentence, what is that moment that made you care? And I've shared this question with hundreds and thousands of activists globally because it's my favorite question to hear these stories. And what I hear, honestly, is stories not dissimilar to my own experiences. Children witnessing domestic violence, refugees having to kind of smuggle themselves over borders, being in school and seeing a colleague being treated unequally. All these things, I mean, in South Africa, a lot of kind of witnessing the inequality of the apartheid system. And what I find really interesting is I've asked this question to a lot of people, and these are the stories I get. Not one person ever said to me, you know, I signed this petition. There was this petition in a shopping mall, and this person asked me to sign a petition, and that's why I started to care. Or I read this pamphlet or this fact sheet, or I watched a panel, and that made me want to change my life and committed to activism. Or I went to a conference, or I read a white paper, or I read a policy. And so for me, this was very telling because these tactics and the success of these kinds of tactics are what we use to define what a successful activism campaign is. But if these tactics didn't work for us, if these tactics didn't move us to care, why do we think it's going to make other people care? Now, what I'm saying is that these are important tactics. We must be doing them. But we need to do a little bit more. And what we need to do is create that feeling, because what are we trying to achieve at the end? We're trying to get other people to care. And so we must think about what are the things that moved us to care, and how can we use creativity in our activism to create that same feeling in others. And this is where I feel personally that creative activism is really, really useful. It's about applying the creative imagination tactically, strategically, and organizationally to make activism more effective. What I said before, everyone has a creative life that they can bring to their activism. What's really important, it's about long-term change, not a once-off tactic. So often people are like, oh, creative activism, let's do a flash mob, or let's do, I don't know, documentary, let's make a documentary film, etc. That is all amazing tactics to use to get people and move people, but it needs to be linked to some sort of long-term change that we want to see in people's lives. So a flash mob is amazing. We get lots of likes on Facebook. That's great. What kind of tangible change does that lead to? So creative activism needs to be seen as part of a kind of holistic advocacy strategy for change. And the final thing about creative activism is the truth will not set you free. The truth is useful and we need it, but it needs some help. I always use the example of, I used to smoke for a very long time. Did I know the truth? Did I know that it was bad for me? Yes. Have I read all the pamphlets? Did I watch panels? Did I see the pictures? Yes. Did that change my behavior? No. I still smoked. What changed my behavior? I fell in love with the non-smoker. So what was it that changed my behavior? It was the truth, with a little bit of help. And I find creative activism is a very, very useful way to help the truth come to life. This is something as well that I love about creative activism. So we know what it is to be effective. And I find as activists, I identify as an activist, we are very effective human beings. We get things done. If you want a march of like 200 people down the road this time tomorrow, I could make a couple of phone calls and probably make it happen. So we are very effective people. But sometimes we're not very affective in the sense that we struggle to move people. Whereas if you look at people that work in kind of creative industries, they are incredibly affective people. They know how to move people with words, with sounds, with music, with visuals. And so the Center for Artistic Activism coined this term affect, which is getting the magic that is the effectiveness of activism and combining it with the affectiveness of creativity and artistry, and creating this magic which is effective and gets change done, but also moves people. And so what I'm going to do is share a couple of lessons and examples that I've picked up along my journey in creative activism. This is, of course, not all a comprehensive list, but just a couple of lessons which I think are really very useful when thinking about creative activism. And this first one is the traffic mimes in Colombia, in Bogota. They were having a huge issue in the 70s with traffic fatalities, and people, pedestrians, motorists, they were dying left, right, and center for people not obeying the rules of the road. A new mayor comes in, and he's a philosopher, and he knows that the people of Colombia, especially Bogota, do not like to be mocked. And so he was like, we can institute all kinds of fines and all kinds of things for disobeying the rules. No one is going to care. But people don't like being mocked. So he fired all the traffic officers and rehired them back as traffic mimes. And these mimes basically mocked people who were breaking the rules of the road. And you think, okay, this is weird. This is strange. I'm not sure about this. Traffic fatalities were reduced by 70%. So it was an incredibly effective strategy and very unexpected for reducing traffic fatalities. So this for me is the one lesson of creative activism, the most important: surprise. Figuring out how we can use surprise to capture people's imagination, to catch them off guard and have them open to the message, the issue we're trying to engage them with. My next example is in China. So the Me Too movement happened, but there was a huge internet censorship ban where they banned the hashtag Me Too, the Chinese government. Activists were like, well, you know what? We don't care. We can figure out a way around it and we can make a plan. We want to be part of this global movement. And so they figured out that Me Too in Chinese means rice bunny. And so they made the conversion of the language to rice bunny because they knew rice and bunny were two words that the government couldn't censor on the internet. And so they had their own rice bunny movement where they joined the international call for women's rights, but changed the languaging to get around internet censorship. For me, this was hugely creative. And for me, it was a really amazing lesson in the first rule of guerrilla warfare: know your terrain and use it to your advantage. As creative activists, our tools are the cultural terrain. That's what we're trying to shift. That's what we're trying to move. And that's why all of us will be best placed to do creative activism in our context, because we need to know our cultural terrain. I can't come, that example from Bogota, would that work in South Africa? I'm not sure. But he knew the terrain and he knew that Colombians don't like to be mocked. And so that's why one of the reasons why that intervention was so successful, and this as well. This was a more recent campaign for legal, safe, and free abortion. The green bandanas were used as an incredible sign of the movement. This for me was an incredible example of using signs, symbols, and spectacle. How do we think of our movements and our organizing? This green bandana was imbued with so much meaning that you could see this green bandana independent of anything else, and you knew what it stood for. You knew what it meant. You knew what solidarity looks like. A colleague of mine was just wearing a green bandana and was on a bus, And this woman came running up to her saying, "Hi, there's this guy following me. Please, can I just pretend to talk to you?" And that was the power of the green bandana. Just knowing that the green bandana meant something very particular, meant having a safe space for women. So for me, it's how are we thinking about signs, symbols, and spectacle within our movements, within our activism? How are we looking at different objects and thinking about how could we use these symbols and imbue them with meaning so they can act independently of us? Another example is working with activists, well, working with communities in Northern Macedonia, where corruption is a huge issue. And for them, the best illustration for them for corruption is potholes. They like the town is riddled with potholes. This is corruption. How do we do something about it? They've done endless letters, none of it has worked. So one of the ideas they had was, let's have a fishing competition. And that's some activists in Northern Macedonia having a big fishing competition in a pothole. They brought a live fish in the bucket next door. And all of a sudden, people started to gather. Journalists came and covered it. And the same journalists wouldn't have covered it if it was a protest, but they were intrigued by what is going on here. Another group of activists threw a birthday party for a pothole, which was 5 years old. And this seems like silly, a little bit silly and fun, but like, is that really effective? The potholes were fixed within a week. And the lesson to be learned here was simple works. Sometimes thinking about something creatively and taking a step back, going, okay, what is another way we can approach this issue of corruption, approach this issue of potholes? A group of kids in another city in North Macedonia decided to take rubber ducks and float rubber ducks in the potholes. And the rubber ducks in Macedonia is a symbol for corruption. Was fixed within a week. So creative activism also doesn't have to be this big, long performance, expensive intervention. It could just be holding a fishing competition in a pothole. This is the Russian doll protest. So a lot of people talk to me about how do you protest in restrictive environments, in environments where you aren't allowed to gather. And Russia is a very good example of that, where it's actually dangerous to be an activist, to gather, to have any kind of form of direct action. So these activists decided to get together to protest against election corruption when Putin was running, and they decided to have a bunch of dolls and have this kind of protest. And this went viral on the internet, and it was hilarious, but also very serious. And also people ask, is this effective? Did it work? I mean, it worked so well that they tried to legislate against this by calling it nano meetings. They tried to instill legislation to say that activists aren't allowed to have nano meetings, which means these kinds of protests were taken very seriously by the Russian government. But it also gave me, I was like, okay, this is a great example of being funny. This is a very serious issue, but they managed to approach it using a bit of humor. And that's often something we don't engage with in our activism, and thinking, what would we like to be seriously funny? Can we be funny in our activism? Yes, I would say yes, even with serious issues, because humor opens people up for an engagement in the most beautiful way. So thinking about how can we be funny, and knowing that context matters. What's funny in one country is not funny in another country, is not funny in another country. So again, know your terrain and use it to your advantage. The war on smog, another example of using covert methods to do activism. In China, they wanted to protest against the huge amounts of pollution. So young people in China went about their usual things that they do on the weekends, getting married, going to ballet, but they did it all with gas masks on. What was amazing about this is that they knew they were protesting. Observers knew they were protesting. The police knew they were protesting, but they couldn't really do anything about it because it didn't look like a protest. So this was an amazing example of activism in disguise, especially in places where activists really struggle with oppression and being able to gather. Couple more examples, just because I have a little bit of time. I promise, Diana, I won't be going on forever. I could go on for days, but I won't. Conflict Kitchen in the US. It's a pop-up restaurant, and every month it has a different theme about a country that the US is in war with. And so one month it will be a Syrian restaurant that has Syrian food and engaging people in Syrian culture with all the facts around the war written on the menu and the receipt, etc. And this was a great example of like not necessarily having to go to where people are at, see what people are already doing. How can we creatively engage people in something that they need to do? Everyone needs to eat. How can we make that an experience where we cultivate empathy? How do we use pop culture? Pop culture is popular for a reason. It has something about it. And what can we think about it in our activism and how we can use pop culture? Video games, also a great, after this, please go play this video game. It's amazing. It's a McDonald's video game where you are basically the queen of McDonald's and you get to run everything and the abattoirs and the fields and the actual shop and the marketing. And what you'll realize very quickly is if you try and play this game ethically, you will lose. And the only way to win is to put hormones in the animals, overgraze the land, bribe the indigenous leaders to take their land, underpay your staff. And what this is an amazing example of is it's demonstrating reality. You get to feel what is in 5 minutes playing a McDonald's video game. You get to understand so much more about the complexity of the issue than if I had read a fact sheet about it. So how do we demonstrate the reality that is being experienced where people can then feel it themselves? This is another amazing example of with climate change. Climate change, it's really difficult to show people the impact, to create a sense of urgency because it is, people see it as so distant and so removed. And just this image is just a simple students protesting in Cologne. I look at this and I get a sense of urgency. I feel a sense of urgency, more so than if someone had given me a fact sheet or I watched a panel. And it's about taking these invisible things. I look at issues like domestic violence as well, that often happens behind closed doors. How can we use our creativity to make that more visible? I wish this was an amazing example of empowering people. Happened in New Orleans. An artist, Candy Chang, just printed for $20 a whole bunch of stickers that say, I wish this was. And she put them all over the city. And people started writing in what they wish this was. Brad Pitt's house, a bike rack repaired. An amazing way to find out from people what they want their city to be. And she gathered all this and it was given as part of a contribution to kind of policy to make the city more inclusive in the rebuilding of New Orleans. So this was like $20 and a way to really involve the community and a way to empower people to say what they want. Don't worry, it's my final example. 24-hour museum, Alfredo Yar, this amazing Chilean man, artist, was invited to Skogul in Sweden where they make lots of paper. That's all they do. And they said, you must come and make art for us. So he said, sure, take me to your museum. I want to see what it's about. They said, sorry, we don't have a museum. I was like, you don't have a museum? Cool. I will build a museum for you. That will be my artwork. I will make it out of paper because this is what you people do. So he made this wonderful museum and they had an opening night and they had the mayor come and local artists and children displayed all their art and it was beautiful and everyone was having a good time. And suddenly people were looking around going, it's called a 24-hour museum. Why? And he was like, well, in 24 hours, I'm going to burn it down. And the people were horrified. They were like, you cannot do that. And so he's like, Soz, I'm doing it. And so they went and they mobilized and they went to the mayor and they're like, mayor, he's going to burn it down. You can't allow it. The mayor was like, well, that's part of the contract. Soz. So they're like, no, but the fire station won't let this happen. It's a fire hazard. They went and mobilized and went to the fire station. And the fire station, they were like, you can't let them burn this down. It's dangerous. The fire station was like, yeah, we're burning it down. And so it got burnt down. And so the question is, why am I telling you this? And what has this got to do with creative activism? What happened was that Freire Yar went home. And 2 months later, he heard from the mayor. And the mayor said, the people have mobilized. They have mobilized, they have raised funds, and they want a permanent museum. Will you please come and design it? And for me, that was mind-blowing, because if I wanted to build a building, I would have gone about it in a very different way. But what Alfredo Yard did was give people a feeling of what it could look like to have something, a vision, a feeling of what would it be to have a museum, how wonderful it is. And he empowered the people so that he cultivated that desire so that they wanted it for themselves, and they mobilized. And the people of Skogel had never had to organize anything for a day in their life. They had gotten everything given to them. This was the first time they mobilized for anything. And for me, that was the most wonderful example of what that looks like, to use creativity to cultivate desire in people so that they want it for themselves. But none of these examples will work for you. And why I say that is because context matters. What's funny in one country is not funny in another country. What motivates one group of people will not motivate another group of people. You are all the experts in your own culture and your own cultural landscape. So you can't copy paste any of these. You need to make them useful to your community and your culture. And I found creative activism a really useful tool. It makes interventions more effective, they're more fun, they're more energetic, they're cheaper, which is always good. They create openings, they're accessible, and it really stimulates a culture of creativity, which is the best. But also, I want to leave you with not this feeling of, oh no, I have to do all these things and now I have to be creative as well. Oh, this is just more stuff to do. I would rather leave you with, you don't have to do everything by yourself. And so there are people out there who creativity is part of what they do in life. Invite them into your spaces. The next time you're having a meeting, the next time you're having a brainstorming, think of who else you can invite to your space. Think about inviting children to your space sometimes. Try inviting artists, invite people from different industries to have a look at what the problem is you're dealing with it. Because the more difference we have in approaching some of these problems, the more room there is for creativity. So you don't have to do everything yourself. It's about thinking, who else do we want in our spaces, and how can we create that culture of creativity? So, sure. Whirlwind tour of creative activism. Diana, did I do it? Did I do it enough?
You did it all and more, I think, Ishta. I think
I'll share the slides with all the people so that they have it.
Yes, amazing. Please do. And just on that, to everyone after this, in maybe 1 week, 2 weeks, we'll send a wrap-up email, which will include this recording and Ishta's presentation and any recommended readings that also come from this session. Wow, Ishta, whoa. Please drop any questions you have into the chat, or you're also welcome to address any questions verbally. While you're thinking of your questions, I do just see Janine's comments in the chat. I relate to your moments heavily and experience it still. My moments that made me care was when I was 10, and my most revolutionary friend to date introduced me to Steve Biko, and it suddenly connected a whole lot of dots. Yes. Also curious if anyone else feels like sharing. What was the moment that made you care in your work? Feel free to also drop that into the chat. Would love to see what comes up. But Ishta, those examples are so fascinating, and it just really opens the mind in terms of how far you can get in terms of creating or connecting creativity and activism, whether it's through fun or through challenging. I'm curious to hear what is maybe a favorite project you were a part of or initiated in a South African context or African context, bringing it closer to home.
So some of my favorite work that I've done is with SWET, so the Sex Workers Education and Advocacy Task Force, an incredible organization advocating for the rights of sex workers and the full decriminalization of sex work. And so we did a couple of collaborations with the Center for Artistic Activism to figure out how can we bring creativity to our fight for decrim. And we did a number of interventions, but I think my favorite one, just because it was the most unrealistic and the most like out there, part of our dream. So this is something for everyone when it comes to brainstorming. brainstorming, you want to think of impossible things. When you're brainstorming, never be like, oh no, that I budget. Or when you're in a brainstorming mode, you turn off that inner critic and you just push and you just see how crazy ideas you can get. And our rule is usually we need to come up with 10 ideas in 10 minutes. 7 of them need to be impossible. And so one of the impossible ideas we got was during the 2016 International AIDS Conference was coming to Durban. And we did all this, the possible ones, like, oh, we need to get sex workers' rights on the agenda and speak to policy people, etc. But one of the impossible ones were, we want to meet Sir Elton John. That was the idea. And I was like, okay, sure, okay. Why? Because I like his music and he's going to be there. Fine. Also another, yes, and is also another, yes, and, but also the Elton John Foundation funds sex worker rights overseas, and he's just started funding in Africa. So maybe it's also good to meet Sir Elton because he can give us the money. Okay, how are we going to do this? Brainstorm. We started getting wild. We started thinking about all sorts of Ocean's 11 type capers. We're going to break into the hotel. We're going to steal the maids' outfits, and we're going to dress up, and we're going to sneak into the room, and carrying on going. A lot of these ideas were going to get us arrested. And then we're like, how do you get a famous person in a room? Give them an award. They have to show up, surely. Like, they have to. And so we invented the award, the Asijiki Award for Courage and Determination or some, I don't know. I forgot the name. But we told Sir Elton John, we emailed him and said, you are the inaugural winner of first time ever sex worker movement is giving you this award. It's an honor. Wow. And then they responded going, okay, sure. Yeah, okay. And then we realized, oh shit, we needed to make an award because this man has like Tonys and Grammys and like Oscars. So we made a beautiful award, the Asijiki Award for Courage and Determination, and we sent pictures of that because his PA has PAs, and we're like, no, Sir Elton, you need to meet the sex worker movement. You're the first recipient of this very prestigious award. And lo and behold, we met him. He agreed. We shook his hand, and we didn't let go of his hand until we told him everything there was to know about the South Africa Decrim movement. And for me, that was my most favorite example because it really made us realize that often we aim too low. We often really think about the possible, and we are too quick to dismiss the impossible. And that was one of our impossible ideas, was like, we want to meet Sir Elton John. And we got to meet him. And that's also one of the examples I use when like very serious grown-up director people say, but this creative activism, it's all fun and games, but how does this help with like serious things like funding? And you're like, well, actually, you use creativity in everything. It makes it better. And like, yes, creativity can help in serious things like funding. And here's an example. And we got a meeting with the Elton John Foundation. Oh, by the way, so it was successful. And we got a meeting in a way that if we had emailed them 5 million times to say, please, can we have a meeting? We would have never got a meeting. So that's one of my favorites.
Wow. That is so cool. Okay, so meet someone famous, create an award. Noted.
Don't tell Sir Elton we made it up. It's okay. Now a thing. It's now a proper award.
Yeah, it's gonna be on YouTube, this video, so he'll know. But I also feel like we need to follow up this conversation. I think most of the people in this meeting or in the session now are South African, where we are experiencing the great load shedding electricity situation. So I almost feel like we should start like a little side group, do some brainstorming of impossible things and make something happen, to use creative activism and shouting about this in some kind of way, because it's getting ridiculous. But sorry, tangents. Thank you so much, Ishta. If I'm going to give a couple seconds if anyone has something burning they want to ask you before we move on to the panel discussion.
Also, one more thing, there is an amazing site called Actipedia. If you all want to have a look and add, because I know, of course, we didn't cover all the creative activism examples, and there's so much more. It's like a live Wikipedia, like online encyclopedia for creative activists. So feel free, I browse it whenever I'm feeling uninspired.
Awesome. Yeah. If you have that link, to please drop it in the chat. Otherwise, we'll just share it in the wrap-up email.
Absolutely.
Awesome. And then I'm just dropping this link here. If anyone joined late, that you can, feel free to please add in, what does creative activism mean to you? Cool, Nadia, for dropping in that media link. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to our panel discussion. Thank you so much again, Ishta. For our panel discussion, Dylan Valley unfortunately isn't able to join us. So we have Zina Scullard, Care Creative, or Claire Homewood, sorry, I'm reading the Zoom, and Diana Sanchez Betancourt. So just to start off with quick intros, Claire is the creative force behind Care Creative, which seeks to facilitate creative, diverse, and participatory spaces underpinned by an ethic of care for both people and planets. Diana Sanchez Betancourt is a board member and co-founder of the urban movement Open Streets Cape Town, and she's a senior researcher at the Human Sciences Research Council. And Zina Scullard is an unapologetic colored queer feminist young woman from Cape Town, South Africa, and she's co-founder of the Queer Feminist Film Festival. Thank you all for joining us today. And for those also attending, feel free to also turn on your cameras so we can see some faces and not feel like we're just talking to a Zoom screen. And at any point, feel free to drop a question or comments in the chat or ask directly. And I think just to start off with, to hear from each of you, what moves you or inspires you to do the work that you do? We'll start with Sina.
Thanks so much, Diana. Hi, everyone. It's lovely to be in the space. Thank you so much, Ishtar. That was an amazing, energizing presentation with amazing examples. So I guess what moves me to do the work I do is believing and knowing that there are alternative ways that we can be and move as a peoples. And there are alternative ways and means to the ways we're responding to issues, right, that we are facing. So whether that be racism, whether that be sexism, whether that be homophobia, whether that be climate change, whether that be capitalism and patriarchy, there are alternatives, right? And I think what moves me is the desire to kind of tap into them and discover them and explore them, and not be so busy being caught up kind of fighting the enemies, right? But creating time to explore and play with alternatives. Yeah, I guess that's one of the biggest things that move me. Should I pass the mic, Claire?
Greetings, everybody. Good afternoon. What moves me is, I guess, a sense of responsibility that I've had since I was a teenager. There was just something, it was like, you have this responsibility, and it's about something to do with using art and creativity. And that is, it was something that I was super aware of from very young, but it's been encouraged by a connection with nature, in being super appreciative of where we live in on this earth. I think we've had a great head start in that connection by just living in a place like Cape Town, to be surrounded by so much incredible nature. So and yes, there's issues with everybody not being able to access it, but in terms of a difference between this and living in a very built-up city, I think we're very blessed to be able to have that connection, and it's that natural connection that definitely encourages and motivates me. Passing the mic to Diana.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, and thanks everyone. This is very energizing. I feel like after Ishta, it's kind of like difficult to keep the energy up in that way. So I'm going to try to be very short, and if needed, I'll speak later on. But yeah, in terms of my Open Streets hat and journey, I think I connect very much to what the other people said. It's kind of that deep sense that, you know, that there's better alternatives and that there's potential and that it is possible. And some things that you think like, oh no, but that's not possible to do it. Then you say like, no, it is possible. There's other ways of being, other ways of using public spaces, other ways of imagining how we could live in cities. So, and I'm from Bogota, I'm from Colombia, so I'm very familiar with those examples that were shared. And with that potential, like, you know, like instead of like having everything like just regulated and we're going to sign a legal document that will make things to work in certain ways. You just go out there and use arts and use creativity and appeal to people's feelings and emotions to just show again that alternatives are possible and better ways of being are possible. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to go a little bit deep into some of your work. Zina, you're a co-founder of the Queer Feminist Film Festival. What is that? How did it come about? Why did it come about? Yeah, if you can please give us a little insight into that.
So I think with QFFF, the Queer Feminist Film Festival, it was birthed in 2018. And it was really birthed out of this desire to kind of have space where queer people, young people, activists, older people, community members, parents, academics could kind of gather and begin to redefine the ways in which we talk about and the ways in which we engage with queer issues, right, or with gender justice issues. And most often, these kinds of conversations or gathering spaces are usually held within like the city center or within academic spaces or within NGO spaces. And for us, it was really important to be able to say, well, how do we break this norm and have these conversations where we are, right? And so particularly in the Western Cape, which is where we were born, we looked at host areas such as Kailicha, such as Manenberg, such as Delft. And this was a really and deliberate political decision to make, right? Have these conversations where our peoples are and because of what languaging around the issues are, but also how we engage. So using film and art and storytelling and dialogue as kind of tools for conversation, as tools for movement building, as tools for solidarity building. And yeah, 2018, that's really the first year we hosted. And I think outside of QFFF, other spaces I'm also involved in. There's this strong, particularly for me personally, language and ways of doing and ways of thinking is something that really intrigues me deeply, right? And so with QFFF, it's about how do we begin to kind of break the language barrier and also the accessibility barrier to these kinds of conversations and make it more accessible and nuanced and be led by queer people and be led by those who aren't normally seen in spaces, right? The unusual suspects. Whereas if I think about work that I am doing through, for example, the AFRE Fellowship on anti-racial justice and racial equity, for me, the why is around, you know, being able to use space and networks in order to kind of bridge gaps or build bridges. So very often we operate in quite siloed ways. And I think Ishtar mentioned, when you have your next meeting, invite people that you wouldn't necessarily usually have in the space, right? And so for me, there's a really strong, there's a strength in being able to kind of build bridges and siloed ways of working. And yeah, for QFFF, it's we're hosting for our fifth year now, and constantly evolving, constantly changing. And I guess that's the beauty, right? We're learning and we're growing, and there's lots of things we didn't get right in the beginning. But I think the cool thing that we've learned along the way is being able to not only focus, for example, on films that's internationally or professionally made, but be able to say, well, okay, everyone has cell phones, or at least, most people have cell phones. And so how do we begin to use tools that we all have in order to begin to generate our own stories for ourselves, about ourselves, and position that as expertise and knowledge and, advocacy, for example. Yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you, Zina. And with Diana, co-founder of Open Streets, also curious, how does that, it's referred to as an urban movement. How did that come about?
Yeah.
And what is Open Streets for those that might not know?
Yes, so, well, Open Streets is a hybrid, it's a very creative idea, I guess I would call it like that. So we're a movement, we're a citizen-driven movement, we're an NPO, so we also formalize ourselves as an organization, because that's the world of funding and that's the world of doing. And we're also a platform for collaborations and for collaborating and showing and working with others at the neighborhood level of things that are aligned with our manifesto. So when we started the organization, that was already, next year is going to be 10 years. Well, 2012 was really, 10 years ago, we had this vision and idea that streets as public spaces and as the biggest urban infrastructure asset that any city has could be something different than just like little paved places where cars go really fast and often kill pedestrians or cyclists, but streets could embody something differently and could embody respect and could embody creativity and could embody active movement and could embody what everybody and anybody would like across the city for it to be. It was an idea also of how do we connect? As I said, I'm not South African, but I have been here for over 15 years. So coming from Bogota, a place where streets are very alive, a place where public spaces are very interactive spaces, and just sitting here with a couple of people and friends from here, we're like, okay, how can we bring that also here? How could that, and I think as Ishtar was saying, like it would be different. Like, so, there's an open streets concept globally that started in Colombia around like, once every Sunday, like 122 kilometers of the whole city in Bogota are close to cars, and they just become this public space where people are skating, cycling, walking, selling stuff, performing arts. So it was just like this, really, it was just like an idea, like an experiment, but it grew into this bigger movement. And I think that's how we have become like a bigger movement. I think the same as Sheena was saying, like, we are changing. Actually, we recently declared, like, we're in a moment of pausing and thinking, okay, how and what do we do next after 10 years of being here? But yeah, it was just like that. And I mean, I think anybody who would visit the website would see that, as I said, like the manifesto, just, it's a call for anybody. And I mean, Claire will be the one speaking next. And we, in the early moments of Open Streets, as well, collaborated around the Musenberg Festival and around thinking neighborhoods in a different way and creating temporary realities that will capture the imagination of people of think, oh, wow, actually, like this is a busy street in the middle of Woodstock and Observatory that is always non-inviting, but oh, when there's people playing, when there's kids in cycles, when there's like everybody just enjoying it and people performing arts, it just becomes a very different place. So it's just like temporary spaces and temporary realities have a very important way in how we can imagine and build not only new narratives of how we can live urban spaces, but just how we could actually embody them. So yeah, I'm going to leave it at that, because I think like Claire will connect very nicely to that aspect of bringing care into the streets and the world. Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you, Diana. Exactly, because Claire, you do so much, from street art to community activations, facilitation, live painting. Curious as to what your process is around the collaboration, co-design, co-creation aspects of your work, because like Diana mentioned, you have worked together. So yeah, what's the process like there?
I really, really enjoy collaboration and working together. I think it's, it just kind of suits me. I feel like we all have these incredible differences to us. And when we put that together, then we're gonna end up with something that none of us could have possibly have created by ourselves. So we create something completely new, different, and beyond like what was anticipated. And I love that process. And I love the building of relationships that happens over time as well and over years, and observing the way that each other are moving or in process with our work, and then seeing the points of collaboration or how we can weave that together. Yeah, and also we each come with our different skill, and there's it's instead of being in competition with each other, which is kind of how it felt maybe in more academic or other workplace environments, where it feels like everybody's climbing on top of each other's head to get to the top, to be that one. I feel like the greatest metaphor we have around us in this place on the planet is also about the strength and diversity. So to really live that by making connections with others and seeing what everybody can bring to the pot, so that we can mix it up, mulch it together, and then, you know, something super exciting can come out.
Love that so much. Aware of time, does anyone have any questions for our panel or for Ishtar? While you may be thinking of one question, I'd like to pose this to the group. Considering the work that you do and how the arts is involved in your specific kind of work, why do you feel the arts are an important or powerful tool to effect social change? Any of you can kick us off.
I can speak. I think that creativity is part of what makes us human. And if we go back to our ancientness, we had these forms of expression which came through us, like music and movement and, you know, making image in the spaces where we were. And these are essential parts of being part of humanity. And it puts us it connects us to other parts of our brain. So I think, like, Western world or world has gone on this whole thing of development, which has taken us into amazing places, but we come back to other forms of expression which put us into other parts of our brain. And you don't necessarily have to speak the same language, because you're able to absorb information and have an experience which is about other forms of communication, which can then connect with other parts of ourselves. So it doesn't have to be all mind. It's maybe more of an embodied or an emotional response.
I think for creativity, for me, is really about play, right? And it's something I'm exploring, or it's something that I'm grappling with a lot, around how to remember just how to play and how to engage the imagination, right? Because I think that the world tarnishes us to a large extent over time, and we forget how to not take ourselves so seriously, and you know, how to engage in joy and just like freedom, I guess, when dealing with really serious issues. And so yeah, I think creativity is play and it's imagination.
Yeah, thank you, Els. Also, just link to that. And I think for me and the experience with Open Streets, for all of us who have been there and volunteering and being part of it, is just like that possibility of seeing, like, as I said again, Main Road, Woodstock, Ops, CBD, transforming itself into a place of having fun, feeling safe, interconnected with people of different backgrounds, and having that physical space as a canvas of, you know, what the creativity of communities and of individuals could happen. I mean, we have had amazing graffitis created on the spot just in a few hours. We had people just showing up saying, this is what we want to do on the street. I'm just going to put my sofa out of my living room into the street. Will that be okay? Yeah, I mean, everybody just do everything. And then we didn't do anything else, just created the space for people to come out with their own creativity. And then I think that's why I'm passionate, I guess, about this concept and idea. And I think, I mean, as many of us have experienced here, when we first started talking about it, people like, no, that would never happen. That happens in places in Latin America, and it was a big challenge. Like, I think for city officials, traffic engineers thinking, how are we going to say people they cannot drive for 5 hours on the main road? But it happened. And anyway, I think I'll just invite people to check the many videos and many stories we have, graphic stories as well. Thank you.
Super, thank you. And last question to end it off. Ishta's asking, all of you have to collaborate with such different people, communities, institutions, sectors, some of which spaces don't prioritize creativity. What are some of the creative tips and tricks you have for collaboration?
Thanks for that question, Ishtar. I think it's just about making friends and just like synergy, I guess. Which is quite a big thing that has driven a lot of the partnerships for QFFF, and also a lot of the partnerships that I've been involved in other areas of work. Being able to understand, like, oh, okay, Diana does Open Streets. How about let's have a conversation and see what comes up? Sometimes there doesn't even need to be a strategy to the conversation or for the conversation. It can just merely be a conversation, right? And then also just like keeping things light and keeping things breezy. We're all human beings. And for me, a trick that I constantly lean in and constantly use is befriending, right? So there's more human connection than we have outside of just the work, and the work kind of flows in seamlessly if there's a good connection, you know? Yeah.
Maybe I'll just follow quickly on that, and then let Claire say her words. But yeah, I think collaboration, it's amazing, but it's also very challenging, I think, in my experience. So I think and co-creation as well. I love the word, I love what it comes out of it, but I think the process is often painful. I think in our Open Street experience, because we need, I mean, to collaborate with very diverse people, like, you know, the crazy artists that manage the Africa Burn in Ops, and at the same time, the improvement district security people that just want to make sure that there's not going to be chaos, and the city officials that have done things in one way for 20 years. So I think the two things I would say, and honoring actually even the title or the name of our organization, is just like compassion and openness. You know, we all come from different places. For traffic officials, like, what it is important is that cars can drive safe on the road, and for everybody, like, their priorities are different. But I think when you open and you have compassion, just trying to hear where other people comes from, then that space open up, and then collaboration is possible most of the times. Thank you.
I think it's very much about what is the connecting factor for the collaboration. Is it something that people feel motivated by, or is it something that's actually just a loss? I think if it's something that people are connected to, and that then they feel that energy inside themselves, then they're going to have that motivation to want to collaborate and put their best selves forward, especially if they're being acknowledged for what it is that they are competent in, or what it is that they, you know, are bringing to the table, and honored for the fact that it may be not the same as the next person's, and it is its own thing. And then to have that reflected back to them is really exciting, but in a whole nother context. You know, maybe they never thought, like, oh, actually my skill, my this, whatever, is now being used in a context which is now reaching a whole lot more people or having a much bigger impact than what they had thought.
Before we wrap up, I just see some last comments in the chat. Paulina was sharing how she first experienced open streets in Cape Town, and then she experienced it in Boston for the first time. They're doing it, and it's amazing there. And Vicky is sharing how I teach knitting to young learners on the Cape Flats. It's really an eye-opener to see the conversation topics that come through when the learners are comfortably knitting away. Makes me think of the work, the subversive stitch. Thank you all so much. Definitely leaving this conversation feeling very inspired, excited to start a load shedding creative artist movement. Yes, thank you again all for joining us. We will share the details afterwards. If you aren't already, please do connect with the Bertha Centre on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. And if anything still comes up, maybe you lie awake at 12 a.m. Because something in this conversation sparked an idea or a question, please do feel free to send an email. Thank you all so much and have a lovely rest of the afternoon.